All right, let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be doing SAT and ACT questions. Anything you might have about those tests. I also do questions on SAT Chemistry, SAT Math 1 and 2, subject tests, college admissions, really anything like that. But the main specialty is SAT and ACT. If you don't know who I am, my name is Rob Shums. I'm the founder of Reason Prep. I do the videos and all the resources and the website and the courses and all that good stuff, the YouTube channel. And so I'm here to answer any questions you have about the tests. The way to ask questions is send an email to ask@reasonprep.com, or if you're in the chat room, you can just leave a message in the chat, and I will try to get to everything, but a lot of it depends on how many people ask. So yeah, email, it's right below, ask@reasonprep.com, or you can put it in the chat. If you're interested in my courses, there's also a link below to the courses that I have, rprep.co/courses, so you can go ahead and check that out as well. So let's go ahead and get started. I've had some email questions already sent in, so we'll just get in on those. All right, here we go. Is your approach for SAT reading always the same for whatever the passage is about? I find myself struggling a lot on the history passages, stuff about Karl Marx or women's rights. Is there any other method you have for history passages? So the overall strategy is the same regardless of passage, whether it's fiction, history, dual passage, sociology, economics, technology, natural science, whatever it might be, the approach is the same. It doesn't really change that much because in the end, the same question types are going to be asked, maybe a little bit of difference between, say, a history passage and a fiction passage. But yes, the overall strategy is still the same. In terms of specific things for history, there's nothing really specific for history. Those are the hardest passages, and really the only way to get better at those is to expose yourself to more of the language of those passages. So, of course, practice is important. But what I found recently is reading, this will actually help you in general with the reading section, but getting some books on history, some popular stuff is fine, but getting some books on history on subjects that you might be interested in and reading those could be useful, especially if they include excerpts from primary sources, because then you can actually see what the language is like, and the author will often discuss what those little excerpts said. So getting some history books and reading those on your own could also be helpful. I have a reading list on my website. Just go to reasonprep.com, look for the SAT, ACT reading list, and you'll see some recommendations for sources from all genres. And so yeah, but otherwise it's more or less the same. So more of a tutoring teaching question, quite interesting. What is the best way to teach SAT grammar? So there's really no shortcut. I like to go with a foundational approach. So make sure students know what is a sentence, what's a complete sentence, an independent clause, a dependent clause, a phrase. Really start from those foundations because they need to understand that to understand run-on sentences, comma splices, fragments, how to use commas, how to use semicolons, colons, dashes. All that kind of stuff is foundational. We also would cover things like what's the subject of a sentence, what's a main verb, subject-verb agreement, what's a pronoun agreement. So it really starts from the foundations. That is the best way to teach the grammar portion of the test. My writing course could be really helpful. So if you're a tutor, if you're a teacher and you need help, you might just direct them to my writing course and use that, integrate that into your curriculum, kind of do a flipped classroom type model. Let them go home and watch the lectures, and then in class you can do exercises and discuss together. But there's really no shortcut. It's just, yeah, it's learning the nitty gritty of things that a lot of students haven't really learned. After being satisfied with my ACT score, oh my gosh. After finally being satisfied with my ACT score, I decided to move on to taking SAT subject tests, Chem, Math 2, Lit. Any advice when preparing? Nothing specific. Main thing is, especially when doing 3 tests, you just gotta balance your time as effectively as you can. So you have to kind of figure out which is your weaker tests, which are your stronger tests, and divide your time accordingly. Make sure you take real tests as much as you can. It's a little bit hard to find subject tests for these, that are real from the College Board, but there are some that exist, both officially released and otherwise. You can find them on the internet. But use real tests. Make sure you do them timed when you do those tests, because the timing can sneak up on you. You have an hour for each test, and especially in the chem and the math too, timing can be challenging. So you want to definitely put in the full practice time. But beyond that, it just depends on the test. Depends on where you're at. It's just, I can't give much more specific advice than that, unfortunately. What is the best way to learn SAT math? So it depends on your learning style. It depends on how much time you have. It depends on the resources at your disposal. If you like books, then an SAT math book would be a perfectly fine way of doing it. If you need tutoring, getting a tutor or course might be a good way to go. If you like videos, you can check out something like my video course, which goes through everything in SAT math completely. But really, there's no shortcut. You have to just learn the formulas, the concepts, learn how it's tested, do practice questions. There's no real shortcut beyond putting in the time and the effort, isolating the areas you're maybe weak in, and putting in more time on those, whether they're more advanced stuff or stuff from middle school that you may not remember. So yeah, it just depends on what your level is, what resources you have, and what you prefer. So like I said, I'm going to put in a plug for my math course. I think my SAT math course is really good. It's complete. It goes through everything you need for the math section, along with solutions to all 8 released practice SAT tests. So that might be a good option. If that's not cool, if you don't want that, then a book, or self-prep with a book, or tutor, if you have a tutor or class or something, would be the way to go. But yeah, it's just going to come down to learning the stuff, learning the facts. SAT 1 has changed, but is there any change for the SAT 2s? No. So the SAT subject tests are the same as they've been for however long they've been. While the SAT 1 has changed over the past 2 years, the subject tests are still the same. So the resources that you might be able to get access to, like previous tests, should still be good to learn those. Should I focus on one ACT section each day? For example, solely on English on Monday, math on Tuesday, etc. Sure, that sounds great. I think what you want to do is make sure you have that mix. So what you don't want to do, which some students do, is they'll study English for 3 weeks, and then they'll study math for 3 weeks, and then reading for 3 weeks. That has a lot of issues with that approach. So definitely mixing up like this is great. Depending on your schedule, you could do one of each, or 2 on a day, depending on how much you're studying. So you could do English, math, reading, science, English, math, reading, science, or some mix like that, throwing in some of the writing. I probably would, it depends on what's going on with your writing score. I may not give writing a full day. I might recommend you kind of mix that in when you've got time elsewhere, and use that 5th day to focus on your weakest subject, double up. And also, depending on your timing, I don't know when your next test is or where you're at in the process, but even doing 6 days a week might be better. And again, if you're doing 6 days a week, you really only need to study an hour or less per day. Again, depending on where you're at in your study schedule. But yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Why do you prefer questions first over reading the passage first on SAT reading? So as my videos on my YouTube channel and elsewhere, my reading course do explain, I do recommend going right to the questions and using those to help you read the passage, instead of doing what a lot of students do and a lot of tutors recommend, which is read through the whole thing, maybe annotate and underline. And so this question is asking why I think it's a good idea. In the end, you have to see what works for you, but I'm pretty confident that the reason why I do what I do and what I recommend is pretty sound. So why do I recommend going to the questions first instead of reading? I'll just give a few reasons. Number one, if you read the passage through, you're going to have to read it again anyway to get answers to the questions. So you'll be reading it twice. Whether or not that's bad just depends on how much time you have. If you're hard on time, reading the passage twice is a little redundant. Number two, when you're reading through the passage the first time without any questions, you don't know what's going to be important and what's not. So if you're spending a bunch of time underlining, annotating stuff that they don't ask questions about, that's a waste of time. In the end, you get points for answering questions, not for reading and underlining a passage. Everything we do is geared towards answering questions. That's the focus. So in my opinion, all of our time in a reading section should be spent thinking about questions, not spending 7 minutes reading through a passage, maybe not understanding half of it, having to go back and reread and underline it. It bogs you down. You go right to the questions and let the questions help you figure out what's going to be important and what's not. That's the core of what my strategy is. Always have a question in mind. Same thing for ACT reading, with a little bit of an exception there, but always in general have a question in mind when you're reading the passage. Never read it just to read it. Same thing with underlining and annotating. Again, if you're underlining and annotating stuff in the passage, marking it up, and half of the stuff you're underlining and annotating isn't tested in the passage, there's no questions about it, what's the point of it? Is it really that valuable? In general, it's not. The other reason is another reason is to focus on, most of the questions on the SAT reading are specific. They're not general. So you should be focusing on specific parts of the passage to get those questions. If you're reading the whole thing, a lot of students get way too invested in okay, the main idea of the passage is this, so maybe the answer to the specific question relates to the main idea, blah, blah, blah. That generally is dangerous because it's going to be about what's in the text. So the focus should always be on small portions, whatever cited in the line reference. So those are 3 major reasons. In the end, you just have to try out and see what works best for you and go from there. But I do think that the way I teach it, there's good reasons for it. So I recommend trying that out and seeing what you think. What advice would you give with double passages? So the dual passages, both on SAT and ACT reading. Main thing is do each individual passages separately first, of course. Do all the questions for passage 1, work through that passage, do all the questions for passage 2, work through that passage. Then take a minute to think, all right, what's the relationship between these passages? Are they the same? Are they opposite? Are they no relationship? Are they just kind of about 2 different topics or something? And use that to help you with the dual passage questions. Beyond that, it just depends a lot on the actual passage. But and I talk a lot about this in my reading videos, both for SAT and ACT. I think I've maybe got some on YouTube on this, but certainly on my site I do as well. What is the difference between the SAT and the PSAT? Actually, before I answer this, I saw one that looked kind of time sensitive, so let me just answer this one quick. How can I watch this later? I'm at work, so this recording of this will be up on my YouTube channel right after this recording ends. So just go to my YouTube channel and you'll be able to watch the entire recording, and then hopefully within a day or 2, I'll release highlights, the most interesting questions / the best answers that I give, and so you can watch it that way. But it will be online. Just go to my YouTube page right after this ends, and you can watch it anytime. All right, going back to what is the difference between SAT and PSAT? PSAT is a little bit shorter, but it's really more or less the same length as the SAT. The top level difficulty isn't as high as the SAT in reading and math in particular, but otherwise they're pretty similar. So if you're practicing for the SAT, it's totally fine to do practice PSAT tests, just knowing that they are PSATs. So you want to be a little bit skeptical of the scores. But yeah, and then if you're studying for the PSAT, using SAT materials is perfectly fine. The only major difference is the timing, how long the sections are, and then a little bit on the difficulty. But yeah, I would say if you're studying for both, focus on SAT stuff. There's plenty of PSAT stuff out there, but there's more SAT stuff. So I would use that to prepare, and that would be fine for the PSAT. How do I find ways of limiting my mistakes on the reading section of the SAT? Well, it just depends on what those mistakes are. There could be 10 mistakes you could be making. It's hard to give specific advice on that because there's just a lot. So the first thing to figure out is what mistakes are you making? So is it a mistake of strategy? Is it a mistake of, so are you not maybe approaching the passages in the best way or the questions in the right order? Something like that. That's kind of what I was referring to before with the overall strategy. Are you just not understanding the main idea, or you're not understanding the arguments that are being made? Is it a comprehension issue? Are you reading too much into it? Are you making wild inferences? Are you falling for trap choices? Are you misreading the questions and not taking the questions seriously enough, focusing on what they're actually asking for? Are you doing the general questions first instead of the specific questions first? So there's a lot of different things you could be doing. Are you making silly mistakes? Are you overthinking the questions? Are you underthinking the questions? Are you going for choices that are too specific or too general? There's a lot of different things that you could be doing, and I think part of the task is figuring out on your end what those mistakes might be. And then when you know what those mistakes might be, then you pursue resources or practice or whatever that can help you address that. I struggle with sentence placement, adjustment, addition, removal in the grammar. So this is rhetorical skills stuff. I have a whole section of my writing course for both the SAT and the ACT about these questions called rhetorical skills questions, in addition to some other videos on my YouTube page, which are kind of a supplemental. But check out my writing course. I have a ton of information about these sections. The main thing that I would point you to is the 4 principles for rhetorical skills. In fact, if you just look up like Reason Prep 4 principles, you might find the video immediately. Just Google or YouTube Reason Prep 4 principles, and you probably will find it. But these 4 principles allow you to, since there's no grammar rules in play, have a framework that you can use to figure out what the answer to a question might be. Otherwise, check out my writing course and my English course. They go into more detail about the different question types, but those 4 principles are really helpful to giving you a way to think about them beyond just like, I'm going to read it and just kind of wing it and hope something jumps out to me. These 4 principles give you a framework that really can help. How many hours a day should I be studying for the ACT? It depends on when your next ACT is, how much time you've put in, etc. What your score goal is. In my SAT ACT study plan course, if you go to the link below rprep.co/courses, you can find info on my study plan course. I go into specific detail about how many hours you should be studying. In general, it's probably less than you think. What's more important, in my opinion, is how often, how many days you're studying per week. So if you're studying, I would rather you study an hour a day, 6 days a week, than 10 hours spread out over 1 or 2 days. It's much more effective, even if you're studying fewer hours, to do it spread out than if you are cramming and chunking it. So, in general, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half per day, depending on your situation, would be good. And then you want to go, again, like 4 to 6 days per week. It just depends too much on your situation, but check out my study plan course. It'll give you a framework, guidelines to know what you should be studying or how long you should be studying depending on your goals and things like that. So there's a follow-up to this, or like there's a context to this, which I'll just lay out quickly. 3.9 GPA, rising senior, haven't done anything in regarding to application. And then, do you think I'll have a shot at applying in the US? I don't know if you're an international student. My answer will be less helpful because I'm not super up on international admissions. It's not exactly my thing, but the colleges I consider are in the top 100 schools, but not Ivies. If you think I'll have a chance, what procedure should I start with? So I'm not much of a college counselor. It's not really my thing, especially if you're coming internationally. That adds wrinkles that I'm not super familiar with. And 3.9 GPA, that's good, depending on, the average GPA, what your rank is. It's hard to know. Like 3.9 sounds good, but what that actually means depends on the school and such. Don't know what your SAT score is. I mean, certainly 1400 plus will help a lot if you can achieve that. So yeah, I think, without knowing more, I think, yeah, you definitely want to pursue applications. It just depends a lot on your situation. So I can't really give much more specific advice, mostly because I'm not a super expert on this, like, should I apply here or there? I know a little bit, I know more obviously about standardized tests and a little bit about the process in general, but specific advice is a little bit hard for me to give. I don't want to send you astray. So I would say seek out resources or somebody that might know more about your situation and ask them that question and see what they tell you. But yeah, I think what I can say is, yeah, go for what you think is realistic given your situation. And yeah, especially if you can get a strong SAT score, that can only help your chances. On ACT Science, do you advise reading the text first or going straight to the questions? For ACT Science, go right to the questions. Just like with SAT reading the passage is very often going to be a waste of time or confusing or just not helpful. And time is of the essence in ACT Science. So you go to the questions, use the questions to figure out what's going to be important. Use the questions as the lens through which you read the passages. And I talk a lot about this in my ACT Science Bootcamp course. I also have ACT Science videos on YouTube that you can check out. Do you offer free trials for your SAT math or reading courses? No, I offer a free writing course. The complete writing course is complete. So that's the other courses are in the style of that. I also have free sample videos from the courses, both on YouTube and in my site itself. So you can see what the videos look like. You can see a table of contents in the actual lectures. If you go to rprep.co/courses, you can see preview videos and things like that. And again, the writing course and the essay course are completely free. So if you like my writing course and you like my essay course, then you'll like my math and reading courses. That's about basically how it works. Otherwise, no free trials specifically for those. On the ACT, when do you advise to bubble in answers on each section? Generally speaking, I advise, this is true for the SAT to some extent, after every page is usually a good time to do it. So you finish a page, whether it's English, math, reading, writing, and then you bubble in your answers from that. It's kind of a good balance between, like, I don't like waiting until the end because what if you run out of time? And I don't really like doing it after each question because if you're skipping questions, you could have problems putting them in the right place. It just takes a lot of time to have to go back and forth. So it's more efficient to do it in chunks. So I generally recommend at the end of each page, but whatever you end up doing, make sure you practice it. Don't go into test day thinking, okay, this is the first time I'm going to try bubbling in this way, because you want to get used to whatever method that you're doing. Do you have a specific day and time that I have live videos? No, it kind of varies. I do send out emails if you're a part of my email list when I'm going to have a video, a live stream. I have a website that I announce it on. I announce it on my YouTube channel, my Facebook group for Reason Prep. And so I kind of give a few days notice, but nothing regular. My schedule is just too busy to set up something super regular. And plus, people aren't available at regular times. So nothing regular, but just pay attention to those resources and you'll see when I'm around. On the normal, I spend about 5 minutes average reading the passages. I assume you mean SAT reading. When I try your procedure and going for the question and reading along, I make mistakes. So I can't say how long you should be reading or not reading. 5 minutes probably sounds right, to be honest. I don't think that reading time is low if you could read through the whole passage. One thing that I will say about my strategy, this is something I get a lot. If you use it once and you get a lot wrong, it doesn't mean anything about anything, right? One test doesn't mean anything. You got to put in the time and get used to whatever strategy might be, whether it's my strategy or someone else's. You have to try it for 3, 4, 5, 6 tests. You gotta let it sit in and understand why the strategy is. Because what you'd have to prove to me, in some sense, is that how does reading the passage through actually help you when it comes to answering a question about line 3? If there's a question about line 10 to 12, what does reading the whole passage do to help? That's the question I would have. In most cases, I think it does more to hurt. So in the end, your reading time seems pretty good if you're going to read through the whole thing. 5 minutes seems pretty fast, to be honest, especially for some of the harder passages. So that's pretty good. I don't think reading time is the issue in the end. It's going to come down to actually attacking the questions, seeing how to answer them. So keep practicing, especially if you're going to try using my method or anybody's. Keep practicing to make that second nature. Because it does take time to adapt and adjust. Okay, so I'll be a junior. What do you think the next SAT date will be better for me? So it depends on how much prep you've done. If you've done a lot of prep over the summer, say for the PSAT, it might be worth doing a fall test. You will be taking the October PSAT, so that is a date that's locked in. As for your next SAT date, if you've done a lot of prep over the summer, then like a November or October, December test might work. Otherwise, probably March. If you haven't done much prep, I wouldn't take your SAT in the fall. I would just do the PSAT and then do maybe the March SAT as your first, putting in some prep through the fall and the winter. Probably would be what I recommend. So if you've prepped, do one in the fall. If you haven't prepped that much, wait until March. do you recommend going straight to the questions on the ACT reading as well? So here is where it's a little bit different. This is the one section where I actually do recommend reading through the passage in the skimming sense. So it should only be about 2 to 3 minutes reading through the ACT reading. And you might say, well, okay, wait a minute. You just preached about you shouldn't read. You should go right to the questions. Why would you do that for the ACT? There's a number of reasons why I recommend for the ACT reading to do that. Give it a skim, 2 to 3 minutes, very quick, just to get the main idea and a sense of the structure, and then go right to the questions. There's a lot of reasons why I recommend it there compared to the SAT. It has to do with the structure of the tests and the way that questions are organized and various other factors. So there I do recommend a quick skim and then go right to the questions. In the end, most of your time will be spent on the questions. So yeah, a little bit different there. But again, most of the focus should be on the questions. Usually find myself falling into trap answers for SAT reading. Also, I struggle with some of the function questions. How can I approach or deal with these differently? So hard to know exactly without seeing a particular function question that you've gotten wrong. And if you want to post one or, direct me to one that you want to talk about, we can do that. As for trap answers, first is to learn them. So there are, I would say, half a dozen or so common trap answers on SAT writing or SAT reading. So trap answers would be too extreme or strong. Avoid choices with overly strong language like must, never, always, certain, prove, anything like that. Not that it's always wrong, but it can often be problematic. Be careful about questions that reuse words from the passage. It doesn't necessarily mean that that choice is wrong. It's just that it very well could be. They often will try to attract you to a choice by taking a word that you read in the passage and putting it into the choice. That alone is not a good reason to pick it, right? So I don't want to say eliminate a choice like that, but just be very careful about it before you pick it. Half right, all wrong. So basically, if even a small piece of a choice is wrong, the whole choice is wrong. It doesn't matter how good the rest of it is. This is probably the trickiest trap of all that people fall into. Wild inferences, just inferring things that are just way beyond what the text can support. Could be true, a choice that could be true but isn't necessarily true or isn't necessarily supported by the text isn't right. Something that's true in real life but wrong because it's not actually supported by the passage would be another. I'd say those are the major 6. There's some other little mini ones, but it's about knowing those trap answers and kind of as you're practicing, as you're reviewing your answers, seeing what those traps are, seeing how they come into play, seeing when you fall for them, when you avoid them, and really learning those traps and getting like a sixth sense about when those traps might be coming upon you. I talk about a lot of this in the reading course as well. Uh, 30 words over the limit. I don't know what to do because if it were to delete words, I feel like it wouldn't be so descriptive or interesting. Guaranteed you can find an easy 30 words to delete. I wouldn't say it's an issue about like deleting details because 30 words isn't really that much. Guaranteed you should be able to find places to condense, compress, cut out excess words. Not only will it get you under the word limit, but it'll actually improve the writing because it'll be more concise, more powerful, more active. So keep looking. Think more about redundancy than about anything else. Are you repeating something that you've already stated? Are you saying something that can be assumed that you don't have to spell out to the reader? Is there a phrasing that you can edit down even if you can cut a word out of a phrasing and condense it? There's a lot of ways you can squeeze in an extra 30 words. So keep looking. Guaranteed you should find something. And it won't have any impact if you're cutting the right stuff on the descriptiveness or interestingness. If you're like 300 words over, then that's a different issue. But 30 isn't that bad. So you're actually in a really good place. So keep looking. There's stuff there to condense. Don't think of it as condensing. Don't think of it as cutting. Think of it as condensing. TI-84, what should you know about it? I don't know about that calculator specifically, but I can say for the SAT, know your 4 functions, know sine, cosine, tangent, know exponents, know radicals, know how to graph functions, and you should be good. You know, some optional stuff in there if you want to use it to calculate means or medians. I think that's probably a little excessive. But, you know, the basic stuff that you might need for an Algebra 2 class is probably all you would need for the SAT. Personally, I think that reading the passage first gives you an unbiased view. Whoops. The passage, especially on the tone. It's possible. Like, yeah, you're not getting influenced by the College Board. So yeah, it's possible in the end. Again, if it helps you answer questions, great. I'm not dogmatic about this. Like I like if you read the passage, do basically the opposite of everything I recommend, and you get a really good score, or you hit your target score, that's great. I don't care either way. I just think for most students, the reason why I stress this so much is students worry way too much about understanding the passage as a whole, way too much, and they don't worry nearly enough on actually digging into the specific wording of the text in the places that they have to pay attention and figure out what's going on there and match it to choices. That is the work that's done. You know, reading the passage as a whole and getting a sense of what's going on, yes, that's important to some extent, but I think it's way overrated and there's way too much emphasis on that. I don't know if it's because the general questions often come first, so students think, oh, I have to answer those first, so I need to read the whole thing, whereas I recommend, no, do the general ones later, do the specifics first. So yeah, it definitely could work. I think there is a value to some extent of getting that unbiased view without reading the questions. On the other hand, I might argue for bias, right? If the College Board doesn't ask a question about the fourth paragraph at all, how much does that paragraph really matter? I mean, we're going to read it as we go through the process of what I recommend, but reading it up front and really caring about it doesn't really make much sense to me if there's no questions about it or if it doesn't impact anything. So I kind of do like the biased view. In other words, knowing what they're going to ask and using that as a frame to see what's important. But I think, you know, there's arguments either way for sure. I currently missed about 2 each passage in the reading section. The PSAT questions are mostly command of evidence, which I assume is the 2-part questions, and inference, rarely words in context, any strategy. So yeah, there's a lot of strategies on these. I have videos on YouTube that cover some of this, so I recommend there. My reading course has information on this. The main thing is just make sure 2 things. You're paying attention to the question, what it's asking for. A lot of students kind of read the question and then kind of answer their own version of the question later instead of remembering that there might be important info in that question, especially for inference. And then, yeah, evaluating the choices is really the skill that it comes down to, and really making sure that every word of that choice fits is so critical. In terms of specific strategies, it just depends on the questions that you're looking at. It depends on the particular category. And like I said, I got a lot of videos on YouTube and my reading course about that. And should I download calculator programs? I don't know. If you want, I don't know. I think the SAT doesn't clear memory. I don't actually know. Reason why I don't know is I don't care. I think any calculator programs are going to be more trouble than they're worth. They're a crutch. They're not going to actually help that much. So you can if you want, I guess, but I don't think it makes that much of a difference in the end. Okay, specific question. All right. Let me get my book. If you haven't done this question, you might want to not pay attention to this. This is from the official Blue Book. Reading question, page 384. No, it's not a reading question. Sorry, it's a math question. I hope this is the right one. Yeah, it must be the one about the worms. Okay, it's a math question. So if you haven't actually done this test, you may not want to pay attention to this. But let's... SAT practice test number 1. Let me put this on the screen for those of you who don't have your book. And what we're going to do actually is I will let all of you read this first and think about the question, and then I will talk about it. Some of you may have done this. If you haven't, you may want to do it now. It's from one of the official practice tests, test 1. So go ahead, read this. I'll give you a minute or 2 to read it, think about it. In theory, you can get it without much computation, but go ahead and take a look at this one and see what you think. Okay, so some of you had a chance to read this. Let's talk about how we would approach this. This question seems really weird, but it's actually very similar to questions involving polls and surveys. And you might think, what the heck does this have to do with polls and surveys? Actually, quite a bit. So we've got a square field measuring 10 by 10. So I'm just going to do a little drawing here. Square field 10 by 10. 10 by 10. And it's divided into 10 rows. It's divided into 1 by 1 squares. So I'm going to draw in 10 rows and 10 columns. And so 10 rows, 10 columns. What do we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I actually should have drawn this while all you were reading that, but oh well. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I think 10 columns. Then 10 of these 1 by 1 squares are selected by the students. They dig up their, oh, this is messed up. They dig up their squares. Okay, these are not going to be symmetrical. I apologize. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Wow. All right, whatever. Good enough. So they divide up into 1 by 1 squares. The students dig up their 1 by 1 square into 10 of them, and then they count the number of worms 5 centimeters underneath the surface. And we can imagine, for example, this is A, this is B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. And then we see the results in the table, and we want to know how many worms are there approximately in the entire field. So how is this like a survey? How is this like a poll? The idea here, these squares have been selected randomly. So the theory is, the assumption is that we can make in this scenario is that these 10 squares would be representative of the field as a whole, that the average number of worms under these squares, like this is where I said you can do this without computation. If you looked at these values and you said, what would be the average of these? If you added all these up and divided by 10, you can actually find it. But you might look at this and say, the average looks approximately like 150, something like that, right? The average number of worms under each square is 150. What you can assume, since these squares have been randomly selected, is that 150 is representative of all of the squares in the field. So sure, some of the squares might be less than 150 and some of them might be more than 150, but that would cancel out. So what you actually have here is 100 squares. 10 by 10 is 100. You have 100 squares, each with an average of 150 worms. So how many total worms would that be? It's 100 times 150, and that would get you 15,000, and that's the answer. So it's a survey and poll question, because in a survey, what's the point of a survey or a poll? Take political polling. Notwithstanding the issues that polling might have had recently, the whole theory behind political polling is that you go out and you ask 2,000 people a question about what candidate you're going to vote for, and then you're going to get a response. And then in theory, assuming you've done the polling right, that is going to map onto the population as a whole. That if you just ask 2,000 people, that would represent the proportion of people who would vote in the population as a whole. It's the same thing here. You sample 10 of these squares, and you assuming you've done the polling correctly, the surveying correctly, that average is going to apply across all the squares. So you can just multiply 100 by 15, 100 by 150. So this is purely a surveys and polls type question, even though it doesn't appear that way. And so one of the things that you may not be as familiar with on SAT math is precisely that kind of survey poll type thing, which many classes don't do. I don't know if it's a Common Core thing and it's like a new thing that some of you guys just never seen or what, but it is something that is tested on this test, and you want to understand what the properties of a good survey are or a good poll, what you can conclude from them, all that good stuff. All right, we have another math question. You may want to, again, not watch this if you haven't done this. This is from the April question and answer service that found its way on the internet. Maine released it. So again, if you haven't done this question, this is from the April 2017. You may want to turn away or just check Facebook or something, not pay attention so that you don't get spoiled. If you don't care, or if you've done it, you can watch it. Yes, this one. Okay. I was just going over this one today with a student, so this one's very fresh. Whoa. Okay, so this comes from, as I said, the April 2017 QAS, the state test. If you haven't done this, don't watch. If you have done or you don't care, then watch. And in fact, I'll give you guys all, I don't know, a few minutes to take a look at this question and think about it, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so the challenge with this one is understanding what this table shows. At first, it's confusing. It's like, okay, wait, is this like the nickel is heads, and then the nickel is heads and dime is heads? Then is that like two separate? So is that 54, 27 times 2, or what's going on here? And so what you need to know is each of these cells tells you how many of the pairings of the dime and the nickel's flips you get. So for example, you flip your dime and your nickel 100 times, because when you add up these numbers, the total is 100. 27 plus 26 plus 24 plus 23. So you do that 100 times. 27 of the times you do it, you get heads, heads. 26 of the times you do it, you get heads, tails. So dime, head, nickel, tails. 24 times you get tails, heads. So you get dime, tails, nickel, heads. And then 23 times you get tails, tails. So that's your breakdown. We want to know what percent did the dime Michael toss land on heads. That is dime, heads. That is this row here. In this row, when you had heads, heads, or heads, tails, those are the trials in which the flips, in which you had dime be heads. So that would be a total of 53. So it's 53 out of 100, which would be 53%. And that's choice D. So in principle, not that difficult. It is a number 17 of the section 4, right? Something, whatever it was. Yeah, calculus section. So it's in principle not crazy of a question, but the table is definitely, I think, rather confusing at first. What is the best way to improve my score by 2 points? How should I study? This is for ACT. I want to improve in all 4 subjects, but I want to improve reading and English. But it's hard for me because English is my first language. How should I study if I want to improve my score by 2 points so I can get an 18? So definitely possible to do this. What I would recommend is check out my SAT, ACT study plan course that's for free on my site. That will let you know the best ways to study, the best ways to prepare for the sections overall. Otherwise, check out my ACT English Bootcamp. Study that. You'll get at least 2 points in the English section. Many students have gotten much more by using my ACT English course. And then for reading, there's some free videos I have on YouTube. I've got free articles. I have my reading course, which is on my website. So those two should be, 2 points at least is very manageable, especially if you're only shooting for an 18. Definitely reasonable. So yeah, check out my study plan course and check out my English course and get working. When prepping the SAT in chunks, I feel like I will not perform as well as when I take the full SAT at a go. What do you think? Absolutely, you do need to mix in some full tests in there. My whole shtick is that students do full tests way too often. You should be doing maybe a full test every 2 to 3 weeks. In the meantime, you do practice sections, workbook stuff, worksheets, videos, lectures, reading stuff, and then full tests should be done occasionally, mostly to just get an idea of where you're at and score, and kind of what you're hinting at here, get practice doing all of this work in a row, because that requires a focus and an energy that you can't get when you're doing it broken up. So absolutely, you should do full tests, but do them every 2 to 3 weeks, and that will get you a nice balance between focusing on stuff that will actually help you improve while also just getting better at doing full tests. I feel like I've plateaued on the SAT. How do I overcome that? I practice every day. So, you know, a lot of it depends on your specific situation, where you've plateaued, how much you might have improved already, things like that. The one thing I can say is learning is often very plateau-like. Let me actually do it even more. So imagine we had a graph here, and the x-axis was time, and we'll just do it this way. The y-axis is your score. Improving on the SAT is much more like this, or we're improving in anything, than what you might expect, which is something more linear. So you might think, as I study more, every hour I study, I improve my score. Really, it is actually more plateau-like. So you'll get a big jolt of improvement and then kind of flatten out for a while, and a big jolt of improvement and then flatten out for a while. You know, obviously it varies, but so being on a plateau is not necessarily a bad thing. You just may be on one of these plateaus waiting for your next increase. So you're not necessarily doing anything wrong. Again, it depends specifically on what you're doing, but being on a plateau is not necessarily a bad thing. You could just be moments away from your next big increase, your next big improvement. So keep at it. Beyond that, it just depends too much on your situation for me to give much more specific advice, but I think you are on the right track. Can I increase 150 to 200 points of my SAT score in months if I answer a test per day? Based on what I just said, definitely don't do a test per day. Number one, there's not enough tests for you to do a test per day. Do a test, full test every 2 to 3 weeks. You should be spending much more time reviewing your work, reviewing your results, your questions that you got right and wrong, reading test prep books, going to courses, watching my videos, doing practice worksheets, and working through prep books. That should be much more of your time than full tests. So yes, you can increase, but just make sure you're doing the right things. Don't just do test. That is, in the long run, going to be ineffective. Official test practice 2, section 4, number 19 and 20. Probably only for now going to do one of those, just because I want to get to everyone. I'll do 19, and then 20 I will leave, as they say, that as an exercise to the reader, or in this case to the viewer. All right, so test 2, another table question. So same difference, or same thing. I'm going to put it on the screen. Again, if you guys haven't done this, it's from test 2, the official test. You may want to not do this now or whatever. It doesn't really matter that much. There should be enough tests. Or if you don't want to pay attention to this, you don't want to get spoiled, just check Twitter or something. What I'll do now is I'll just give you guys a few minutes to look at this and read it and maybe think of an answer, and then we will talk about it. Okay, so sociologist chose 300 students at random from each of the 2 schools and asked each student how many siblings he or she has. The results are shown in the table below. There are a total of 2,400 students at Lincoln School and 3,300 students at Washington School. What is the median number of siblings for the students surveyed? So we have 600 students. Their data is in this table. We asked them how many siblings they have, and this is the numbers we get. In theory, if we had 600 students and we lined up all of the number of siblings they had in a row, starting from 0 going all the way to 4, the median would be, since we have an even number of numbers, the average of the, let me change this, the average of the 300th and 301st sibling number, right? So we would do, we'll add these up, 260, 190, 90, 40, 20. We would do the first 260 numbers would be zeros, and the next 190 numbers would be ones, and the next 90 numbers would be twos, and the next 40 would be threes, and the next 20 would be fours. And so we would find the 300 and 301st number, and we would average them out, and that would be the median. Now, of course, writing out 600 numbers is ridiculous, and we don't need to do it, because we would think, okay, wait a minute, whichever band, whichever number of siblings we find the 300th and 301st number, it's going to be our median. So the first 260 numbers are 0. So I've got 260 zeros. Then I have 190 ones, and that takes me up, if you think about it, to the first 450 numbers. So somewhere within this band, somewhere within this set of ones, I'm going to find my 300 and 301st number. And if they're all ones, then if I average 1 and 1, I just get 1. So the median ends up just being 1, because the median, the 300 and 301st numbers of this list, will be in this band. So that's why the answer would be B. So no need to do any crazy calculations. You could have done the same thing with a histogram. So one of these little bar charts, right? One of these bar charts. You could have done it with this table. You could have listed it out if you were masochistic, but no need to. Just count out where the 300 and 301st number will be. Where will the median be in that data set? And whatever band it's in will be your answer. How do I read the passages right for reading? Very broad question, almost impossible for me to answer with any helpfulness. Practice, I guess, is the best answer I can really give, right? You just got to put in the time. Reading is a skill. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes practice, it takes repetition. It takes just doing a lot of hard intellectual academic lifting and labor. So practice, practice, practice. Check out my reading course for a lot more information on specifically how to do this for the SAT/ACT, and check out my YouTube channel. I've got a lot of videos on reading, so just get to work. There's no other shortcut beyond that. Can I increase from 5:30 to 6:30 in the next SAT subject test math 1? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That seems pretty reasonable. Just got to put in the time, got to put in the practice tests and review the questions. Focus, especially for you, on the first 30 questions of the 50, because those are going to be your bread and butter questions, your key questions, easy and mediums. Not that you don't try 40 through 31 through 50, but 1 through 30 are going to be the key questions for you there. I didn't get the question you discussed, number 17 from April 2017. How did you do the breakdown? You'll need to be more specific with what problem you've had, because otherwise I'm just going to explain everything I just did and I may not answer your question. So what was the issue with the way I explained this? That's the key. That's what you're going to figure out. If you're able to ask pointed questions, is a general thing for everybody. The more specific your question, the more actually you're going to learn. Because if I just repeat everything I said again, I may not actually hit on what the problem is for you. So if you can figure out where the disconnect came in, I can definitely try to clear that up. What do you recommend for the best SAT prep books? I'm looking to improve in math and reading. So of course, I'm going to plug my own stuff first. If you're looking for video courses, check out my courses. I think they are really good, and students have really benefited from them. That being said, SAT prep books, the main one is the 8 test book. It looks like this, the official guide. but it has 8 tests in it. That is a absolute must to have. You can always print the tests out if you don't want to buy the book, but hey, I like having all 8 tests nice and bound up, printed out for you. It's just convenient. Beyond that, in terms of prep books, I mean, my general advice to this is stick with books by independent tutors. I tend to think that they are better, or at least more interesting. They got more of a personal touch. Problem with the kind of company books, Princeton Review, Barron's, Kaplan, etc. Not that they're bad. It's just, I don't know. You're getting like a book by committee, and I think getting a particular tutor's perspective on how they teach things and what they think is effective. I don't know. I just think it's better. So stuff by independent tutors is good. Eric Meltzer's books are particularly good for reading and writing. Pulling the SAT math is good. Yeah, I mean, in the end, any of those things should be fine. College Panda here is good. I've looked at it a little bit. It looks pretty solid for math. Yeah, so I think anything like independent tutor, start there. And that should be good. Would you please tell us how to answer vocab questions and what vocab list do you recommend? I have a vocabulary list on my website. Go to reasonprep.com and search in the search bar right in the homepage. Search for vocabulary. You'll find my SAT vocab list. That's what I would recommend. How do you answer the vocab questions? Do I have a video on? I mean, I definitely have stuff in the reading course, but I don't remember if I have a video on YouTube about vocab and context. It's in my reading course. In the end, a lot of it's knowing the vocab, but there are some strategies you can use. The main one is for vocab questions is when you read the sentence in the passage, cross out the word, put in your own word, phrase, or idea before you go to the choices. Try to come up with your own sense of, okay, from this sentence, from what I'm reading around here, what word do I think fits here based on the context? And then go to the choices and compare. And a lot of times when you get good at it, you'll actually like pick out the word before you even look at it. But what that lets you do is it keeps you focused on the context rather than the actual word itself, which can be misleading. You want to focus on the context, what that word means in that context. And so that would be a strategy to do that. How do I learn from my mistakes for the SAT math section? So yeah, this is always the challenging thing. Certainly books and courses and classes, etc., are designed to help you do this. If you're self-prepping and the books aren't really helping, this is where it gets tough because it's very hard for us to identify our own mistakes, right? They're mistakes for a reason. They could be a blind spot, something we don't know, something we don't know that we don't know. And that's where it gets really tricky. That's where you do need some outside source, whether it's a book, whether it's a course, whether it's Khan Academy, whether it's a tutor, whether it's a class. You need something that will be the guide for you. That's what learning is about. You learn best from experts, from mentors, from people who know what they're talking about that can make you think about the questions in a different way. I would say one thing to do is keep a notebook or some Google Doc or whatever you like to keep track of things in, of the questions you get wrong, the question types that you're missing, the formulas that you need to know, the stuff that you continually make a mistake on. You need to keep a log of your progress. If you're just doing practice section, practice section, practice section, not keeping track of your mistakes, it's going to be really hard to identify them. So that would be the most important thing, I would say. I'm going to continue just for a few more minutes. So if any of you all have final questions, please post them, but I'm going to be ending in 5-ish minutes, just FYI. How many full SATs do you recommend I do before the test date? No particular number. It depends way too much on your situation. My SAT course, it's not about full tests, really. That's not a metric that really matters as much as putting in the time working on the skills, the strategies, the content. That's going to matter more. As long as you're doing at least, depending on like at least 3 or 4 full tests, you should be fine. Then it's going to come down to what you're doing when you're not doing full tests, which is really where the learning and the magic happens. So I just answered this, but I will just briefly follow up on the last part. What's on the SAT when it comes to vocab? Check out my website for a vocab list. How do I prepare for it? So use flashcards, either actual flashcards, or you can use a program, an app like Anki, A-N-K-I, Quizlet. Links and information on that is also on my website in the vocab section. So check that out. It should answer all your questions. A lot of people say just pick a letter when the time is running out. What do you do? This is in reference to ACT. This also applies to the SAT as well. Yeah, pick a random letter. So if you're running out of time in the math and you've got 5 questions that you can't get a chance to do, I would just pick B, 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 B. Just pick B down the line. That's the safest and least stressful, in my opinion, way of dealing with that. So definitely just go B, 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 B down the line if you run out of time. All right, so okay, great. Now, thank you. Now, as for the question, I have a problem with the history and literature passages. No matter how hard I try, I can improve my score above 670 due to them. Any advice on how to conquer them? I kind of referenced this earlier. These are the hardest ones, in my opinion, on the test because the language is so tricky. So really, it's coming down to you got to expose yourself as much as possible to that kind of language, whether that's in SAT reading passages, whether that's in stuff that you read on your own. Check out my reading list for more info on that. You just got to expose yourself to it, really spend time digging into those questions and those passages, right? You want to squeeze every ounce of knowledge you can out of the questions you do for those passages. Make sure you fully understand the passage, fully understand the questions and the choices as you're reviewing it. So not during the test, you got to do what you got to do, but afterwards, when you're reviewing the test, really put in the time to figure out what's going on in the passages, why are the questions the way they are, why is the answers right, why are they wrong. Really putting in that time is the key to really understanding how those passages are put together. Okay, looks like we are out of questions. So to wrap up, check out my courses, rprep.co/courses. I've got a bunch of free courses on the SAT and the ACT, in addition to full bundles like my SAT, all SAT course bundle, my all ACT course bundle, platinum package, which covers everything. So a lot of resources there, a lot of videos on my YouTube channel. Check out the playlists section of my channel. I've organized them all into playlists by section and by test. So that should be really helpful if you're looking for specific advice. My website, I've got articles and guides and resources, so check that out. You've got plenty of stuff to work on. You've got plenty of tests. You've got plenty of resources, whether it's my site, Khan Academy, whatever you've got. So as I always exhort people to do, start if you haven't started already. Start, study, do a little bit every day, and over time that's going to result in big gains. So let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out. Join my Facebook group, join my website, reach out to me in the group, whatever, and I'll be happy to help you out. So thanks for watching, and I will hopefully see you in, I don't know, a few more days when I have my next stream. So thanks for watching, and talk to you all later.